Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. I'm always fascinated by the stories that we have, where we came from, our origins, and what got us to where we are today, and how we make an impact. We all make an impact, whether you believe it or you realize it or not, on society, others, relationships. This gentleman has quite an amazing history that really began with his father way back, and connections to Caltech, and kind of a trailblazer dad was, and he is as well, as a chemist, an artist, an author. He's done so much, so many different experiments that have really opened our eyes to a lot. Even our conversations about things like the election and how the polls work. Fascinating to talk to this gentleman, and that is why he is our professional of the year. Grant Venerable joins us once again here on the program. Hey, Grant, how you doing?
I'm fine.
Great having you back here. I intrigued the conversations that we had talking about your father last time we got together, and I thought we never finished, and I thought it might be impactful to get back to that. And his roots there, even at Caltech, go back to what certainly stands out as Caltech's first black undergraduate. And they've actually honored him many times there at that school. They've even got a portrait of him up at Caltech, don't they?
That's right. It's in Venerable House. Grant D. Venerable House is one of the 12 or so residence halls at Caltech.
Wow. Just when you look back at his history, and we're going to get back into it in just a moment, what's the first word that comes to your mind when you think back to your father's history, the impact that he made, and how it kind of charted your future? What's a word that comes to mind? Word or two?
A pioneer, unknown, unwitting pioneer, not knowing he was a pioneer.
Wow. That is a true pioneer when somebody doesn't realize that they are one.
I would say yes. Yes. I myself, but I have not been willing or able to recognize that until really the last few years. Really?
So you look back at your history, and then it kind of comes more clear for you in terms of...
It's getting clearer every day, and I think this Thanksgiving made it even more clear. So it was a lot to be thankful for. My book title says it all. Footprints in the chaotic unknown. We are in the chaotic unknown in the world today. My life has been a footprint. It has had several footprints within the scope of my existence. That's what I'm looking at this Thanksgiving.
Without getting into detail, I'm curious. You said it seems like you had some realizations this Thanksgiving.
Yes.
What came about?
I would say the election of 2024, November 5th, was an experiment because I made it an experiment. For the last probably 50 years since I finished graduate school, even longer than that, I've actually accepted life as an opportunity to perform an experiment on anything of my choosing. You don't have to have a great laboratory to do an experiment. My laboratory has been my own life. It has been my own family, my experiences of family and ancestors, one great large experiment. What that means for someone who from childhood took an early interest in science, astronomy originally, and then physics, chemistry, chemical physics. So now I can consciously do what nobody understood how Albert Einstein did it, but he was known as a thinker. He would do experiments in his mind based upon questions he had about phenomena in nature. His general theory of relativity came out of thought experiments of saying, what if? What if this? What if that? What if not this? What if not that? Out of that steady logic that came very powerfully out of asking those questions, he came up with a general theory of relativity and a special theory of relativity. The general theory having to do with gravitation, which is now getting such huge boosts in the last, I'd say, 5 to 7 years in the science world. And the biggest boost comes from the James Webb Telescope satellite that's way out in space, bringing in new pictures of the universe, pushing time, going way back in time, like 12 billion to 14 billion years, and seeing galaxies that were formed back then. Now, my experiments are not so elaborate as the James Webb, but they're important for life. I woke up this morning looking at my telephone, my cell phone, received a Thanksgiving message from my sister Linda, who lives in the Mojave Desert in Southern California, not too far from Palm Springs. And on her new Facebook profile, she has a picture of this beautiful, bright magenta barrel cactus bloom. This flower is pure, brilliant magenta in color, and it sits against this barrel cactus, which has thorns all over it. There's a lot of paradox in that very statement. The beauty amongst the thorns of existence, and how beauty comes from thorns in many phenomena. I'm looking at the election in that. I think for most people, most voters, it was tantamount to a thorny matter, a thorny experience. And people are trying to make sense of it, but I can now declare from my thought experiences, it is not to be made sense out of. Although the news media tries very hard, but where they're limited is with the limits of standardized reasoning, which in everyday existence generally works. But you're looking at something like an election, which they've been trying to poll for to predict results. When you start from that place with standardized logic, you don't get very far at all. And so the results, I predicted the results would be unfathomable. I didn't know what they would be. I just knew it would be a very great challenge to the people of the news media. Number one, their educations don't cover trying to understand the cause and reality impacts in that election, because everything they're coming up with means nothing as far as what the actual causes were. Now, let's start there. My sister sent me this beautiful photograph, this barrel cactus flower, beautiful magenta, and I wrote something back to her, which was the following. Thank you, sis. Something there is about a desert flower, such as this bright magenta cactus bloom on a barrel cactus, that represents the most intense color and beauty, almost in defiance of? Or is it because of life amid the hottest, most arid, inhospitable environments? However, I think it has to do with the sheer resilience of life itself, even when wide segments of humanity choose to focus on limiting so-called practical worlds of darkness and gloom. And I would add to that the practical worlds of logic and rational reasoning, which have their limits, and they've now been stretched. They don't work for just what happened on November the 5th. That could also be a good conclusion for just sharing a little of my father's paradoxical history Who would have imagined when this man who was a youngster in the middle of the year 1904, he was born in that year in Kansas City, Missouri. Who would have thought? He may have thought, but he wound up in the field of engineering. This youngster, this babe, whose father was a barber with a very high-class barber shop in Kansas City, Missouri. It was typical of very fine barber shops then, operated and owned by African-American owners for a very upper-class white clientele. I'm not going to get into definitions. We all know what the common views are on race and the words that describe it, but they're nothing close to what is the actuality. Someday, the news media may discover, if someone takes the right courses, what race is really about. Europeans, back a few hundred years ago, had it right. They would refer to people of a certain nation, like the Irish nation, as these people of the Irish race, and then these people of the French race, or these people of the Chinese race, or these people of the Moroccan race, or the Venezuelan race, or the Native American races, the Australian race. All of that was perfectly all right and explained what people needed to do to communicate. But now we have genetics involved. We have phenotype involved. We have geography involved. And the truth is getting out, but the truth is not seeped into the courts. The courts make decisions as they seem to say they don't understand race, and they'd rather not talk about it, even though they make decisions like affirmative action in which the use of race is banned. But they've not clarified what in the heck they mean by race. And California was the first state to make the big mistake with a bond issue, not a bond issue, a ballot issue called Proposition 209. It's one of the reasons I left California after teaching at San Francisco State University for several years in the Department of African American Studies. And one of my concerns was a scientific, accurate definition of race. And I've had arguments with my physicians and their medical assistants about, when you say on my blood test that my numbers are fine if you're of the black race, but if you're of the white race, these numbers are risky for you. And I would say, what do you mean? What do you mean by race? They don't really know. But race comes down to genotype, where your genes come from in a particular place in the world. And in the experiment I did in my class one day, and 60 students in there, and I pointed to each person in the class. We probably talked about this a little already. And I'd say, what is this person's race? And if they had dark skin, they had certain facial features, hair features, they'd say, oh, black. Or I'd point to another person and they'd say, white. And I said, well, is this true? Let's look at this young man. He had features like a Southern European. And what is your race, sir? Is it white? No. Is it what? Then what is your nationality? What is your phenotype? The phenotype is what you see with the physical eyes, or what you see is the hair type. Then there's nationality. People often substitute when they say, oh, what is your nationality, Dr. Venerable? I say, my nationality is American, United States of America. Oh, no, I mean your nationality. Like, where are you from? I said, California. Oh, that's not what I mean. You know what I mean. Well, of course I knew what they mean, but I'm playing along here. Well, my race comes from my genotype of 3 great gene pools that were blended together over the last 300 years. Native American, African from West Africa, East Africa, Middle Africa, and European, United Kingdom, and Switzerland, and some places in Southern Europe. Okay, well, that's where this cactus flower is getting me, and I don't want to get too far afield.
I want to jump in just for a moment. Now, you've said that we're in a very chaotic time. Would you say, Grant, that currently, with everything going on, that this is the most chaotic time, I want to say, in your history, in your recollection of time over the years?
No, it isn't.
Okay.
Not the most chaotic. I've had chaotic times all my life, and it's a matter, and I mean chaos from a very mathematical viewpoint and definition. I don't mean chaos in terms of a pig's breakfast, confused mess of stuff. I mean chaos as a different kind of order in an apparently disordered-looking system. That's what defeats people now. Now, I know where we were going. I was talking about my dad's dad, who was a barber, but his mother was a domestic servant, a cook, and a housekeeper. And where did she get that ability? She got it from Odessa, Missouri, 35 miles east of Kansas City, and a little south, I believe. But his mother was born in a family compound of several people, and two of those people was a couple, Colonel and Mrs. Elliott, who actually owned my father's grandmother, his mother's mother, during this period that we called slavery. All right. Now, that's where the interesting chaos begins, because, of course, the Colonel and his wife were very loyal Confederate Southerners, yet they were loyal to other values as well. That's what introduces a creative chaos that has been all throughout American history, that goes beyond race and what you see with your eyes. So the people who were owned as slaves, where did their loyalties go? To the Union or the Confederacy during the Civil War? A real paradox. After the Civil War, what happened? This affected my father's background, his history, his future. The Colonel and his wife told their 4 servants who had served them during slavery, let's stay on here. There's really not a place you can go to earn an income. You might as well stay here. They agreed, and they kept doing the chores that they'd already been doing. They weren't doing hard field work. That was a big difference. It was a very unusual kind of servitude. It was more of an extended family type of based servitude. So these people stayed together until death did them part in 1910 to 1918. So the old colonel passed away in 1911, his wife in 1918, my father's grandmother around 1917. When the inheritance were divvied up, the servants were given a small allotment for their retirement. That was a big piece, because my father's mother received her mother's part of that allotment, and when she migrated to Los Angeles, bought a home with that. So who was my father around during the 1900s through 1920? When he would visit his grandmother in Odessa, he had playmates who were cousins. Now, the real ticker here is that some of his cousins were actually white, members of the Elliott's family. And that's an interesting story in itself, which we won't go into here, but just to note that it was a truth that came out of that. But my father, as a result of being around a great diversity of playmates and other people, including relatives, was used to people of diverse heritages, very comfortable with them. So when he got to Los Angeles and going to college, first at USC and then UCLA and then Caltech, he was comfortable with the Caltech racial human environment. Without that, he couldn't have gotten through. But he also did not have the terrors of slavery on his shoulders in his memory. That made a big difference. When you can go to college around people that don't look like you, but you're comfortable with them and you have no chips on your shoulders to bear. Now, that says a lot, Steve, right there.
That's a great point when you think about when he was navigating Caltech decades ago, what the racial mentality was at that time. And it sounds like he was comfortable. He was comfortable being there. Would you say that's true?
He was comfortable, and by his own testimony of his experience, he was comfortable. And yet he was aware. He was aware that Pasadena was officially a very segregated community, more so than any city practically in California. Pasadena was like the Deep South in terms of racial relations. That would be hard to believe, but he was comfortable. He had a different relationship with the police than people of color normally had. When he'd be out by himself in the evening at night in Pasadena, if a police patrol car saw him, they would flag him down and say, "How are you doing today, Grant? Let's drop you off at home." Because they did not want black people walking on the streets of Pasadena, really at any time. There were few families, and one of them became his family away from home in Pasadena. Those are things that have not been really discovered by the historians and the sociologists yet. But that's a story told in my memoir, Footprints in the Chaotic Unknown. The Caltech story is in volume 4 in the last 2 chapters.
It sounds like your dad had a lot of courage.
I don't think he had that much courage. I think he had a rather an innocence and a vision of himself. He had barriers, yes, but I think I'm a lot like my dad was. I knew what I wanted to do, and I did what it took to get there. And that meant sometimes engineering my way around barriers and people who were barriers and getting to what I wanted. Otherwise, the two of us learn how to take life very easily, even in a moment of temporary crisis. Oh, this will pass. So what did I say in a little writing on Thanksgiving Day? That it starts with, I have reframed my own reality to exclude the dark gloom others feel, to embrace my own preferred narratives. My dad had a narrative about himself. Our narratives are really gods of our life. The very same narrative that emboldened my enslaved ancestors to defy what so many perceived as racial barriers, but were not. Now that statement needs a lot of unpacking, and I think we need to do that at some point. But it meant that you approached life in a different way than if you noted that it was filled with barriers. And we looked at the ancestors' success patterns, and we looked at how they simply reframed their realities and found success patterns that were not possible if you constantly dwelled on barriers getting in your way.
Thank you for saying that, because I'm seeing this in a totally different light, where you have a goal or you have a direction and you just head in that direction. It's almost as if you block out what's around you. And that's, what am I referring to? Those challenges, social situations, racial divide, all of that. Just keep going. Just keep swimming. It's kind of what it sounds like. Wow.
And it doesn't deny that those barriers were there.
Sure.
It doesn't deny the wounds and the hurts that were taking place to so many people. But it made you more conscious about how to navigate that kind of landscape.
It's like forward momentum. You keep going instead of stopping. Doesn't mean as you're going, you're not seeing, like analogy, the car. You're driving in life doesn't mean you're not looking out the window and seeing these situations. You're not ignoring them, but you're moving forward. Grant, wonderful talking with you. The memoir is available if anybody wants to really dig into an amazing history, family history, I'm going to say. Just do a Google, Grant Venerable. It is spelled as it sounds, Venerable. He's our professional of the year. Thank you so much for being here today and digging into some very interesting views of life that are relatable to all of us. I really appreciate it, Grant.
Oh, you're welcome, Steve.
All the best. We'll be right back. Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Let's go inside the mind of a 10-year-old.
I should have worn those earrings today. I like those earrings. Gabby has those awesome earrings. I need to ask her where she got those, but that's just what she would want me to do. I'll have Michaela ask her for me.
Buckle up, Sarah.
Yeah, but then Michaela will be like, why don't you just ask her yourself? That's just like Michaela.
Sarah, buckle up.
Michaela's such a great name. I wish I was called Michaela. There's like a dozen Sarahs in my class.
Hey, we're not hitting the road until you buckle up, honey.
Oh yeah, seatbelt. I forget sometimes because my brain is like busy, you know? I wonder if there's pizza at school today.
Sometimes it can be tough to get through to your kids, but it's not impossible. Always make sure they're wearing their seatbelts, even on short drives. Remember, you have the keys, you have the power. Never give up until they buckle up. A message from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council. Visit safercar.gov/kidsbuckleup for more information.